The universe is so vast that there must be intelligent life in it somewhere. And if there is, the chances are that it's going to be older than ours, and therefore capable of traveling across the universe. There are people on Earth who claim that it has already traveled and has in fact arrived here. We won't argue with this, but the fact remains that even if it hasn't arrived here, it will one day do so. When visitors arrive from outer space, they're going to make their first landing, in all probability, in a lonely spot such as this, where they can get their bearings before they make the first approach to us. This first approach is likely to be an extremely important one, and a lot may depend on our response to them. For instance, what would you do if in a lonely spot you came face to face, assuming they have faces, with an alien intelligence? What would be your first reaction? Well, to help you decide, we've been drawing up a code of first aid, a kind of interplanetary etiquette.
And lesson 1 starts here, in the heart of the jungle. When we face our first alien, our very lives may depend on persuading him quickly that we're not only intelligent but friendly. The problem, how to communicate this to another species. Lessons can be drawn from our experience with the more intelligent animals. Zoologist Dr. Gilbert Manley explains.
I think that although there might be extremely great difficulties in understanding the language or system of communication of some extraterrestrial being, there are also hopeful signs. And I feel this because we find, when studying animals, for example, that all animals, and indeed ourselves, share certain basic features of their languages, of their communication systems. Experience of animals, at least, suggests that there are certain laws, you could call them, certain rules, which one ought to follow to get on with this strange animal. And these, of course, are fairly common sense things, really. They are really things to avoid doing. One finds that you should avoid making sudden movements. You should avoid making loud sounds, and shrill sounds are often extremely disturbing to animals. And direct gaze is quite often an extremely worrying thing to an animal, or indeed to a human being. And heavy breathing is another such thing.
If we slipped up at our first encounter with an alien, we might never get another chance. But Dr. Manley warns of the mistakes that can arise, even when we're dealing with a familiar animal.
I think one example which is very commonplace, which concerns our own misunderstanding of how animals communicate, is to be seen in what we call the grin face. And this we see in primates such as chimpanzees. And when such primates grin, it really means that they are extremely apprehensive, extremely afraid, and are seeking reassurance. Now, an example of this was when the chimpanzee Ham came back from space in an American capsule, and featured in a great many newspapers all over the world was a picture of Ham grinning happily. At least happily was the interpretation that most people put on it. In point of fact, poor old Ham was really feeling extremely terrified.
But experience with animals will be of little use if the alien turns out to be completely inorganic, like the Daleks, without our usual eyes and ears. Here we'd have to invent an entirely new way of making contact. One such way, using everyday household objects, is suggested by radiation expert Maxwell Cade.
One of the first things which we have to establish is a common semantic reference, something which is going to mean the same thing to the alien as it does to us. Now, unless the alien is vastly different to us in respect of his lifespan, he could only have come from one of the nearer stars. He couldn't have come from a vast distance because the time would be far too long. If he is coming from one of the nearer stars, then we have a common semantic reference. Because if we take any of the familiar star patterns, such as the plough, which we have here, it is only after you have receded into space for a vast distance that this two-dimensional representation of what in fact is a pattern in depth of stars begins to look different to what it does to us on Earth. So, assuming that the aliens haven't come from a very vast distance, but from one of the nearer stars, they would recognize this just as we do. And we can try representing this pattern in various different ways. If we put an ordinary Polaroid spectacle in front of a light source, which polarizes it in one direction, and then take a second one and rotate it in front of the first, you can cause the light to be modulated, made brighter or less bright, simply in this way. Now, this is a way in which an ordinary source of light might become a method of communication to an alien who is sensitive to polarized light. But perhaps he isn't sensitive to light in our ranges at all. Perhaps it's right down in the ultraviolet or even further. The luminous paint on watches gives off a hard radiation. Here we have a representation of the Big Dipper, the plough, made out of the faces of watches. To a being equipped with organs for its detection, it might represent a better picture of the source which we're trying to talk to them about than one which would be given by visible light. Some animals are sensitive to magnetic fields. We might try making a picture of our familiar galaxy using magnets instead of sources of light. Another possibility is that he has something which is much more analogous to our sense of smell. It's even possible, in fact, that you might have to communicate by means of patterns of smell. One could, for example, remove these watches, which are sources of hard radiation, and replace them with onions, which are sources of a particular type of chemical molecule. The alien being probably lives in an atmosphere of some kind. It might not be oxygen and nitrogen as ours is. It might be a totally different mixture of gases. He might even live underwater. But almost certainly he will live in an atmosphere, and this atmosphere will be capable of propagating sound or something like it. So that we're not being too ridiculous if in the first instance we go out waving our arms and shouting. But the sound that he can hear might be of a totally different frequency. He might not hear this, but he might hear this. He might even hear the ultrasonic sounds that bats can hear with frequencies perhaps 100, even 1,000 times higher than those which we can hear. Another possibility is that he would be sensitive to electromagnetic radiations of much longer wavelength. We know, in fact, that the human body itself even gives off wavelengths in the radar range, and so does an ordinary electric bell. An ordinary electric bell can cause quite a lot of interference on radio and TV, and it's possible that we might take a series of bells and arrange those in the form of our familiar star pattern as our first basis of communication.
Contact has been made, but how now to tell our gifted visitor from a distant galaxy that we too are intelligent? Astronomer Henry Brinton.
The first and much the easiest way, I think, is to send him a twice times table. This is awfully easily done. It doesn't depend on any system of notation. I'll just show you how easily it can be done. All you need is to send, first of all, two groups of one each, and then a group of two groups of two, followed by a group of four, three groups like that, two groups of three, followed by 3, 4, 5, 6. And that, to anybody, is a recognizable pattern, and is recognized in the multiplication table by 2, and this must convey to him that we're trying to tell him something.
To an alien, lured by the bright lights of our planet, our buildings alone should indicate the degree of our intelligence. The very fact that he has arrived here at all is proof of his. But the alien intelligence could be very different from our own. We may not be at all compatible. One of us might have to go. But the golden rule in our book of etiquette should be that difference of appearance must not lead to difference of opinion. For in fact, the earth need die screaming only in fiction, At any rate, that's the view of the thousands of enthusiasts who claim that aliens have already made test landings all over the world without dire consequences to humanity. Some of the early invaders are described by the president of Britain's UFO Research Association, Gordon Crichton.
There is a type that we call the bellicose hairy dwarf that's been seen. He's rather unpleasant. He's got rather nasty long fingernails, and he's hairy, and he's not at all nice, but he's got a very advanced technology as regards flight. I have been told by the astronomer who knows more about this subject than anybody else, I daren't mention his name, but he told me that he thought that probably on a population basis that this country has quite likely had more sightings than any other, so that it's wrong to imagine that only excitable Americans see flying saucers. We can only say that the thing appears to be building up in some way or other, possibly coming to some kind of head, to some kind of confrontation, because it is a fact that they are landing now more frequently than ever. We've got to get our people more sky conscious and to get them looking up. And the more they do that, the more they are likely to see.
And in Britain, regular UFO watchers already number several thousands. But no statistics about sightings have ever been published here. In the United States, of over 10,000 sightings meticulously documented by the Air Force in the past 20 years, 9,500 have been officially attributed to natural phenomena, like hallucinations and weather balloons. But for the remaining 646 sightings, no scientific explanation has ever been found. When one is, we need to be well prepared.